So I'm Lester Knutsen. I've been with Advanced DataTools. I started it many years ago, and been working with Informix since 1983. And this webcast is being recorded. The slides and a replay may be available in a few days if everything goes right. It's very important. Please keep yourself on mute as the background noise can distract everyone. And you probably don't want everybody else to hear all the background noise either. There is a chat button in the bottom right of your screen, and if you could use that to ask questions. Now, I may not see the question right away. When I'm full screen like I am right now, I don't see the chat, but I will pause a couple of times during the webcast and look for questions, and I have a question period at the end. So what we're going to do today is talk about upgrading to Informix 1410. And I'm going to go through the install because it is a little bit different. And then I'm going to go through the steps of upgrading. And then we'll go through setting up Informix HQ server and the Informix HQ client. I did a class last week and it was great. We started out the class, everybody was running 12, and just like I am here in this window, and then the first day, everybody upgraded to 14, and we did the whole class on 14. It was a lot of fun. So let's start out. What's new in 14? There was a great announcement, and I'm not going to repeat that. From IBM and HCL a couple of weeks ago that talked about the new features in 14. It's got a lot of speed improvements, security improvements, usability, and enhancement improvements. I was in the beta program, and in testing it, I've got a benchmark that runs for 24 hours, and one of the fastest times I've ever seen was with 1410. Now, why you should upgrade though is in IBM basically keeps the current +1 release active. So if you're on 11.7, that support ends next year. And you need to start planning to upgrade if you're on an earlier version of Informix. Now, the big difference I want to talk about is the new installer. And I'm going to share with you the things that confused me when I was working with it. The first time I installed 14, it came up and said, you only have the developer edition. And the reason is it's one binary. The binary by default is the developer edition. And you have to have a Java license piece if you're going to install something else. So when you get the software, and I'm going to CD into my directory here, this is what you get. You'll have a Java file that has the license for the version that you're going to install. You can still run IDS install, and it will pick up whatever jar file you have there and give you that license. There's a great README in the install directory that lists all the license and gives you some examples of installing it that we'll go through in just a minute. So you can also use the jar file to switch from one edition to another. You do have to have Java 1.8 someplace. It does not have to be in Informix dir like this example is. You can just, as long as you have Java, you can run it that way. Or you can run IDS install or IWA install, and that will invoke the installer for you. So let me go through a couple of things about installing. To do the install, you have to be root. And so I'm going to log in as root. I think it's very helpful when you do the install to create an environment. And so I have an environment file here that basically says I'm going to set up a test update server. It gives me the path to where I want Informix to be. This is so I don't install it on top of my existing install. I want to keep my version 12 server that is running right now running. I don't want to have to shut it down until I'm ready to. And we will in this webcast upgrade this server to 14, but I don't want to shut it down. I want users to keep going and keep using it until the very last minute. So I'm going to run my Informix environment file. And if I echo, this is very important, Informix server, it's to a non-existent server. And so I will be fine. And then I'm just going to run the IDS install. It will pick up the Java that I have there, launches the install. This will just take a couple of minutes. And then it will go through and install it where I tell it to. So it's doing some Java initialization. Hit return to continue, and accept the license agreement. Because I set Informix in my path to a new directory, it's going to install it there. And I'm a big advocate of put every version in a separate directory with the version number on it. So when the next version of 14 comes out, FC2, I'll have another directory there with FC2. That way you can go back and forth between versions. I'm going to hit return. I'm going to do a custom install just to go through the options and hit return. And when you do a custom option, everything is checked by default. So I'm going to go ahead and take everything that's there. Hit return. I'm going to say 1 to continue. I'm not going to enable role separation, and I don't want it to create a server. So now it's going to give me a summary and tells me where it's going to install it, and I'm going to install it. So not too much difference. The big difference is you have to have the right jar file in there for what you're licensed for. And so when you download it from Passport Advantage, you want to make sure you download the jar file too for what you're licensed for. It also means it's fairly easy to do a version change. Just reinstall with the new jar file and you can change the version you're running. I'm installing Enterprise Edition, and now it's done. And so let's go take a look at what it did. So I'm still have my Informix pointing to the version 12. I've installed version 14, and let's see what's in that directory. So here's the directory of what's installed. And let me point out a couple of things. The first thing is there's a new directory there called HQ. If I do an ls on HQ, whoops, I have to cd into it. This is the new Informix HQ agent for monitoring the server, and I'll talk about that in the second half of this webcast. The big thing, though, is there is no ESQLC. ESQLC, got to spell it right, or ESQL, as there was in version 12. If I go to my Informix 12 directory, then it's there. So the SDK, Java, ESQLC are all separate downloads, and that was the second big surprise to me. So you want to download them separately and install them separately. Um, they're still available. They're just not part of the server install anymore. So upgrading. Once you've installed the software, and so I've got it all there and in /opt, we can talk about upgrading. And let me, I have another thing I want to show you guys. This is a upgrade project plan that I'll share with you when we post the webcast that I have sort of in detail the steps that I go through when I'm doing an upgrade. And this is a plan I've used all the way back from version 7 and 8. And I've changed it over the years. So it will basically, if you're on 11 and want to upgrade to 12, this will also work. And what you need to do is first create a new directory for the software. We did that. Install the software. And then you need to create new onconfig and SQL host files. This is really important, not to copy over your old onconfig and SQL host file, but you want to create new ones. Particularly with the onconfig, the SQL host you could probably copy over, but the onconfig will contain new entries that aren't there in version 12 or 11, and especially if you go back to earlier versions. I'm working at a client site that copied their onconfig from version 9, I think, or 10, and they get messages all the time. Every time they start the server saying these values no longer apply. So you want to start with a new onconfig. And what I like to do is, let me bring my little cheat sheet up here. There's a great utility. Wrong server. I'm on. This is already upgraded. I want to go back to my 12 server. This is my 12 server. There's a great utility called onconfig diff. And if you have kept the standard onconfig and not touched it, you should be able to diff your current onconfig and tell the differences. And so if you run that, it will show you all the differences between your current onconfig and the new one. And again, it's onconfig diff -c -f opt the path of the onconfig standard, and then -s and the path of your current onconfig. And so I've got a few parameters in file 1, which is the standard, that are not in file 2, which is my current onconfig. I've got a few parameters in 2 that are not in 1, and then I have the differences. This gives me a list that I can go through and create an onconfig. And I always start with the onconfig std. And bring an onconfig std, copy it into the current directory, edit it, make the changes, and you're ready to go. Now, I've already done that. And I've also already done that with the SQL host file. So I've got those ready to go. So I'm just going to copy the SQL host file over to opt Informix 14, not into 12 because I'm upgrading to 14. And I'm going to copy the onconfig that I prepared. So now my onconfigs are ready to go. Always start with a fresh on config. I can't emphasize that enough because there may be new parameters in there you want to take advantage of. It's worth spending some time looking at the on config. Now, if you have any user-defined functions in C or Java, you'll need to recompile those. You'll need the ESQLC SDK to do that. And then it's highly recommended, not required, but highly recommended, you look for in-place alters and fix them. And I want to spend a few minutes talking about in-place alters because I've seen a lot of questions about this. Informix uses in-place alters to speed up a database schema change whenever possible. So if you're changing a schema and there's no reason to update existing rows, let's say you're making you're moving from character 15 to character 30, there's no reason to go through and update the existing rows, but you want character 30 for all new rows. Informix will create two versions of your table pages. And it's really recommended to have those in-place alters fixed before you do an upgrade, primarily because you can't go back very easily. It makes it much harder to go back to the old version if you had to go back. So let me get the command. I want to show you a command, and we're going to do a couple of things here. This is the directory I want to be in. onCheck minus PT will show you any in-place alters. And I've got a table here in a database called benchmark1. The table is zip. And it says, everything looks good right now. Don't have any in-place alters. Well, let's go into DB Access and create an in-place alter. And so I'm going to alter the zip from 15 characters to 30 characters. As you can see, the old zip was 15, the new zip is 30. Now I have a potential in-place alter. If I run the same onCheck again, you can see now there are two versions of that table. There's still 171 at the old version, and then 0 pages at the new version. And that will remain 0 until I do an update. So let's go update or add a row to that table. So I'm just going to add a new city with a long name. Added 1 row. Let's take a look and see what happened now. Now you can see I have 1 page, and these are pages, not rows. I have 1 page that's at the new version, and 107.11 at the old version. So this is a in-place alter, and what you want to do is get all of these pages at the new version. There are a couple of ways of fixing this. And finding out what you have. I have a script here that I'm going to use that's based on version 12. It will probably not work on earlier versions. This is based on the sysadmin database and what it does to find in-place alters. And it goes out and says, okay, you have an in-place alter in this database at this table. Now, there is a script here I have, and if you do a Google on it, for the older version, it takes forever. I'm not even going to run it, and it doesn't always return reliable results. onCheck minus PT is the best way to find out if you have in-place alters. How do you fix in-place alters? So this is the script I showed you. I've got the before, did the script. Now I have two versions. Let me get the slides. The way you fix it is you just say update zip set city equals city where 1 equals 1. This goes through and will force every row to be updated to the new schema. And so I'm going to come over here and I have a script just to do that. I run it, it updates 41,000 rows. And now if I do the on check minus PT, you can see the oldest version, there's 0 rows. And I have a lot more rows at the current version. They're all there. And that's what you want to see. You want to see the older versions. And you can have 3 or 4 versions if you've had several changes over time. Now, just as a side note, you notice the current version takes a lot more pages. And that's because I made the row bigger by 15 bytes. And that basically means less rows fit on a page, so it took more pages. So that's how you go about finding and fixing in-place alters. Now that I've fixed it, you can see the result. If I also go into DB Access and run my check for in-place alters, it will say there are no in-place alters found. It's highly recommended you do this because you're trying to prevent contingencies. If there was a problem, this could be a problem with reverting back to the old version. The other thing you want to do is run a data integrity check on every page, every database in the server. So I'm going to do an on check on the reserved pages. I'm going to do an on check on extents. I'm going to do an on check on the system catalogs, and then an on check on the data and indexes for each table. And if you have smart blob spaces, you want to do an on check for that. So I have a script here that I'm going to run. Actually, let me cat the script so you guys can see it. It's going to go out there and create a log file, and it's going to do the reserve pages, the extents, check the system tables for each of my 3 databases, and then check every page, every table, and every index in all my tables. Now, this can take a while to run, and this is actually a good idea to do, before the upgrade. Maybe plan an upgrade, over a month, and before the upgrade, do this so that you know if there are any problems. If there are any problems, you want to go fix them. And you can run the script with the option -y where it will fix them. You can run it with a -no where it won't fix them, and then you need to look for errors. Now I ran it. It created a log file, and that's what I always like to do. So I'm just going to do a grep, and I do a grep -I to avoid so I can look for error in both upper and lowercase. And it comes back and it says, okay, you do have some errors. Now, the first 2 errors, I know what they are. The tape dev in the reserved pages is different from the tape dev in the on config. And that's because I changed the on config to do a backup. And in the reserve pages, it still says dev null. So that's an acceptable change. The second change is that the value of log files in the reserve pages is 6. The current value is 80. And that's because since I last started the server, I have actually added all these log files. So again, that's an acceptable change. I can fix that by shutting down the server. In shutting down the server, it will write to the reserved pages and then bring the server back up, and everything will be okay. Now, the other errors I saw are tables called sys errors, and that's acceptable. So what you want to do is look at this, look at the output, grep for errors. If you have a table or an index that has an error, you want to fix it before you do the upgrade. Now, this is very important. Before you do the upgrade, you want to do a backup. You want to validate that the backup worked, and you need a rollback plan. You need a, how do I undo everything if the upgrade fails? I haven't had an upgrade fail on me in years, but I still create a rollback plan. So let's do a backup on tape minus S, do a level 0 backup. And I backed up to a directory. So let's just look at the directory. You can see I've had a couple of backups in that directory over the last few days. So I'm good on my backup. The next thing I want to do is check the backup, and I'm going to use Arc Checker, and I'm going to use Arc Checker minus TDSV to read that backup and make sure it's valid. I've had too many clients that have come to me and saying, I can't read my backups and I need to do a restore. And if you're just doing backups and never checking them, you've got to know that you can do a restore. I've seen tape drives go bad. I've seen disks go bad. Arc Checker is the tool you want to do to check your backups. And all you have to do is minus TDSV if you're on the same server. It will read your on config file so it knows all the parameters. If you're taking it to another server, you can check it there. Another good way to check a backup is take it to a secondary server or a test server and do a restore there. That also works really good. And then last but not least, you want a contingency plan. How are you going to roll back? Well, I have a backup, so that's going to be my contingency plan if the upgrade doesn't work. Now, I'm ready to start and do the upgrade. The first thing is to make sure that there's no users on there. And this is really important. I was at a site many years ago, and we're doing an upgrade, and we had it all planned. We had no user access. Right in the middle of the upgrade, a user tried connecting, and that created a lock that prevented the upgrade from happening. It created a deadlock. And it basically, it's probably the last time an upgrade I've done it failed. It created a failure, and we had to go back to the backups to restore. So you really want to make sure there are no users, there are no cron jobs. That's oftentimes the culprit is their cron jobs, and they may not even be cron jobs on the database server. So what I'm going to do is bring the server down into single user mode. And once it's down in single user mode, I'm going to shut it down. And then after I've shut it down, I'm going to change the symbolic links. And this is why I use links, is this way none of the users have to change their environment variables. I'm going to check the on config in the SQL host file. And To change the symbolic links, I need to be root. So I'm going to remove Informix, which is the link. It says, do you want to remove that link? I'm going to say yes. And then I want to do a ln minus s. And it's really, you want to use the full path. So now Informix points to 14. The test is to do an onstat minus capital V. It says, okay, you're running version 14. Now I haven't done anything yet. I haven't started it. I think it's very important to change to Informix PWD. I'm in Informix. Check your SQL host file. Got to change it to the etc directory here. Okay, that's my SQL host file. Check your on config. And that's the right on config. It's got my changes in it. And then what I want to do is I'm going to start and monitor a log file. And what I'm going to do is in one window here, I'm going to monitor my new Informix online log. And I'm going to use a tail minus capital F so that even though the file isn't created, it will monitor it. And let me get over here to another window. Okay. And now I'm going to do an on init. Now, the on init command I like to use for this is minus JVM. And J brings it into single user mode, V is verbose, and W is wait. Do not return control until it's all done. While it's done, I can look at my other window and see what's happening. And you'll see it's going through a bunch of conversions. And it's rebuilding the sysmaster database, all those databases, and bringing the server up. Once, because I did the M, when it's finished in single user mode, I know it's really finished. Now I can go on mode minus M to bring it up in multi-user mode. And boom, I am done. On stat dash, server's up, it's version 14, and away we go. So now you want to test the installation, and a very simple way to do that is I'm going back to my upgrade directory. Open up DB Access, make sure you can connect to it. I can connect to it. Try it from some of your applications. You're up and online right now. But before you really start using it, you want to perform update stats. And this is really important. The number one thing I see after an upgrade is people say performance is slow. And that's because the upgrade has the old stats, and you want to do your stats, make sure they're current. And so I also have a script here. I'm just going to cat it so you guys can see what it is. And it's actually going to run update stats. And let me bring it up. I'm going to do low, medium, and high following the recommendations, and this is going to do it for all the databases. So let's run it. And it's running low, medium, high. I have 3 databases that it's updating. I've got, several gigs of data here. So it's a nice fast system though, so it shouldn't take too long, but a few tables do take a bit of time. And I'm going to let update stats run and complete. Now I think I'm ready for users. This is really important, though, to do the update stats before you really turn on all the users. Because if stats are wrong, users are going to say, performance isn't very good. And it's very important when you do it. I want to point in this is you drop the old distributions because the old distributions were created with the old version, and that's what may not work in the new version. So you want to drop the distributions, and then you want to do a medium and a high with the distributions for the new version. That gets my server up and running. If you're using AUS to do update stats. By default, AUS doesn't kick in till Saturday and Sunday, the automatic update statistics. And so I've seen upgrades where they upgrade on a Sunday evening, and the first week performance is terrible. AUS runs the next Saturday, and performance is good again. You really want to avoid that by running update stats high as soon as you can. Now you can enable your users, test the upgrade. Sometimes I'll do update stats high on some really big tables later. That's possible. And then make sure everybody can connect. And then this is very important. Now you need to do another backup because if things failed going forward and you had to restore, you only have the version 12 backup to restore. So I'm going to stop on tape -S, do a backup, and now after this backup is done, I'm ready to go. Okay, now see it's up and running. I'm ready to go. And that was easy. It's not that hard to do it. You can also do the on checks again. I'm going to skip that because of time, but it's a good idea after you've done the upgrade to run the on checks again, primarily because the new version may find a problem that the old version missed. Now, one of the most exciting things with 14 is Informix HQ. And so the next little bit is going to be talking about getting HQ up and running. And there are 2 parts to Informix HQ. There's a server and an agent. And what is HQ? It's sort of a modern web console guide. There's a great series of articles here, and you'll get them in the slides on how to set it up, getting started, setting up the server agent, everything you need to know about getting it up and running. So setting up the server, there are a couple of manual things you have to do. And I have a server running on another machine. And so let's go in here. One of the things you have to do is set up a server properties file. And after you get it set up, There's an example file in the Informix directory, in the HQ directory. The only thing you really need the first time you run it is a password for the server administration. And then I have a script here. I'm going to show you guys what it looks like. It basically says Java -jar Informix HQ server.jar and the properties file. Now, if you run it in the foreground, it doesn't end. And if you Control C out of it, it will stop the server. So I'm going to run it in the background with no hub. And there's my HQ log file. Now I've got HQ set up. Let's go log in. Now, I've set up a server. And I've got, from our last training class, I've got a group here of 8 training servers and another group. We call them the training tigers and the training servers, but 2 groups of 8 servers. Some of them are still running from the last class. If I go into this one, the server's online, the agent is offline. Let me go through the steps of creating a new server. And so I'm going to add that server I just started. And that server is on a machine called Tiger 1. And the host name is Tiger 1. And the port is 9088. And the username for monitoring is a read-only user that has access to the sysadmin database. It doesn't have to be Informix. I'm going to use Informix. The admin credentials, though, really needs to be the user Informix. It needs to be someone who can do things like run onspaces command. And so I'm going to hit submit. And boom, voila, that's all I had to do. I've got my server I just upgraded. It says it's online, and it's there and ready to go. Now, if I go into setup, and this is key, there's a server ID. And when you set up the agent, this ID is really, really important because that identifies the agent to the server. So the agent is going to run on the individual machines that you set it up. The server is here on my central server connecting to the sys admin and the sysmaster database on that server. So if I go in here to agent, the first thing I need to do is set up a repository for that agent. And I already have a repository set up on one of my Tiger servers. And the repository is a database called Informix HQ. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to tell it to save that repository. Now, I need to deploy an agent, and I'm going to show you how to manually deploy an agent, and I'm going to show you how to automatically do it. I'm going to say automatically, overwrite if there is one there, and there is because I was testing this out earlier. I need to give it a username and a password. And then a directory, and this is a directory on my other machine. Remember, the server Informix HQ is running on Tiger 8. I just did the setup on Tiger 1. So I need to give it a directory. And this is one of the mistakes I made when I was first doing it. The directory has to have write access by whatever user you use here. I tried setting it up in opt and it didn't work. So I'm going to set it up in home Informix, and I'm going to call it Informix HQ agent. and I'm going to tell it to deploy. And it said there is a problem failing it. Did I misspell Informix? Let's go take a look. This is a fun thing about upgrades. Let's just see if there. Oh, no wonder. I've picked, I think, the wrong server here. Tiger 1, 9088. Okay, it's not letting me deploy that. That's okay. If it doesn't let you deploy it, you can deploy it manually. And as an example, let's go back to Tiger 8, where I'm right here. If you're deploying it manually, you need to have an agent properties file. And the key thing is that server ID has to be right. The server ID tells the server what the agent is. You give it the URL of the server. So I'm on the agent here, and I'm telling it to connect to Tiger 8 at 9088. And you tell it the host of the Informix server. So I'm going to start, and I have a start script. That I'm going to run, and let's just run the agent start. That runs it for Tiger 8. It's up and running. Let's go back here. To do that, I'm going to go back here to Tiger 8. It's Tiger 6. Sorry. There's Tiger 8. Now the agent is online, and it's showing me what's going on with Tiger 8. Another machine I do have an agent on is Tiger 2. And Tiger 2 is another server I set up. It's running the agent, been running it for a little bit. Let's play around with Tiger 2. This was my backup machine. SSH into Tiger 2. It had already been upgraded to 14. And here's the agent directory I did a deploy here. It put the jar file. It did the agent properties, and there's a log file of the agent running. So let's see what we can do with this after we've got it set up. You can add sensors. You can have it monitor a bunch of stuff. You can add alerts and have it alert you when certain things go wrong. And you can set up user permissions. But let's dive in. I've got no incidents. This is a brand new server. And let's take a look at some of the things you can do with it. The first real thing is configuration. This is your on-config file. One of the things I like about it is it will show you dynamic or the items that can be changed while you're online. If you say show all, it will show you all the on-config parameter changes. Performance shows you the status of checkpoints. Let's go here to, let's do some work here. I'm going to go to my advanced class lab O2 benchmark and just run a script here. And let's go back. And in a couple of minutes, it takes a few minutes to refresh. We should see the server taking off in terms of the performance. That's a very I/O intensive benchmark that we're doing. Inserting a bunch of rows, and we can take a look at the sessions that are running, look at the threads that are running, looking at the virtual processors that are running. Come back here. Yeah, we had a whole bunch of checkpoints just kick in because of all the transactions we're running. So this gives you a snapshot of what's running on the server. The other thing you can do is take a look at space, and I've been playing around with this. You can create a DB space. I'm going to create one called Lester 2 DBS, and I'm going to make it 100 gigs. You have to have, again, a path. And hit create. Oh, I've already got a chunk like that. Let's create another one. I'll just call it test DBS. Informix chunks, train 1, test DBS, and tell it to create it. And now it successfully created that. So you can manage space. You can come in here and here's my test DB space. I can actually click on drop it if I want to drop it. And it will tell me that it dropped it. I can come here to look at storage pools. I can look at backups. And if I want to run a backup, I can say run it. And it's submitted a job to run, and it's going to run it in the background. I really like this, is you can schedule your backups. So I have here a schedule of backups. Every day, a level 0 is going to run at right after midnight, 0 a.m. And it will tell me the status of when it runs. Let me refresh this. Yeah, updated a few seconds ago. It just ran. And you'll see the backup commands here in the log below this. Recovery logs shows you your physical and logical logs. You can move your physical log. It's very easy just to add another logical log. And I'm going to pick the DB space I want to add it to. Boom, I've got another logical log. So this is sort of a start. It's not everything, but it's a start for things you can do to administer your server. System information gives you some basic OS information. And this is one of my favorite, SQL, but you can type onstat commands like onstat-p or onstat-gckp to see all the checkpoints, as well as type select star from zip. Let's look at that zip table. I need the word from. And run SQL commands. You can turn on SQL trace here, and under logs, you can look at the online log, which we were looking at, but this is one of the favorite ones, is you can look at the API log. This shows you a log of everything that's been done using the sysadmin API from creating my DB space on down. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with Informix HQ. Doesn't do everything yet, but that's all coming. And I'm really excited about that. So let me get back to the slides for a minute. So I talked about adding a server, deploying an agent, manually setting up an agent. You just need to edit this file. There's an examples that comes with it. And then you need to start the agent with a Java command. And then you can pick your servers. You can take a look at different things that the servers do. There are a whole series of alerts that the server does. And you can run SQL commands. So cool. I'm going to take a minute in just a minute and do questions. But before I do questions, I want to point out a couple of other things. I'm going to get my chat window open. So if you see the chat icon, I will take questions, and I'm going to let the questions sort of go into chat, and I'm going to talk for a few minutes about a couple of other things. First off, Carlton Doe is doing an IBM Informix Roadshow. This is a series of free one-day events that are going to be a deep dive on 1410. Highly recommended. Here's the URL to go and register for it. And there are the cities that it's going to come to. Atlanta, June 4th, Denver, June 6th, Phoenix, Seattle. If you're here in the Washington, D.C. area, it's going to be July 11th. And we're going to have a Washington area Informix user group around that. It'll be in Dallas, July 25th, Chicago, New York. A lot of good stuff there. And you're going to have a whole day to spend with Carlton and doing a deep dive on it. Second thing I want to mention is the IIUG Informix User Conference. This year it's going to be in September in LA, and there's more information on the IIUG website. And I'll leave it at that. Registration is supposed to be open real soon. Then we have two webcasts coming up. One on Thursday, Mike Walker is going to talk about database migrations. And what I showed you today was doing what's called an in-place upgrade. I have version 10, 11, or 12, and I install 14, and then I do an in-place upgrade. Mike's going to talk about what if you're also migrating to a new server? What are the different ways of doing that using imports, exports, the high performance loader, and external tables? If you go to our website, you can sign up. Please register like you did today. And here's sort of the agenda of two of them. Now, I should say we had it originally scheduled for June 6th. We had to change it because the Carlton's Roadshow was scheduled on the same day, so we decided to move Mike's webcast a day earlier to accommodate both events in Denver. And then the last thing I want to mention is our training. We've done 2 courses this year. Actually, I've done about 8 courses this year. If you have 4 people in a company, it's actually cheaper to do a private course with us. And we've done a number of private courses. When we do a private course, we can tailor it to your environment, but we can also do it remotely. And we can use our training servers. There are a number of flexible options there. I did a series of private courses for a group in India without going to India. And it was fun. I did it at 9 o'clock their time, which meant it was 6 or 7 o'clock my time in the evening. I stayed up all night and did it. It was a lot of fun. October, if you want to spend 4 days learning about 1410, this is the course to sign up for. We're going to do a sort of a deep dive on 1410 and everything. But also if you're on 12, it's a good course. There's a number of things that will work with all versions. And I think that's it. This is our trading room where I'm doing the webcast. Each student has their own machine. So you can, I like to say, you can crash your machine and it's not going to affect everybody else. It also means when we do the advanced performance tuning course and you run something, nobody else is affecting your performance. It's your machine. You're the only thing running on that machine. And in addition to all of this, we do Informix database monitoring, support, and training. So let me take a look at questions. So when you deploy the agent for the first time, are the metadata tables created for the repository? Yes. I've never had to manually create tables. The only thing I did is create the repository database. So if I come back here to which one? I'll just start a new window, go to Tiger 8. DB Access, Informix HQ is a database. All I did was create that database. And all these tables have been created since I created that database by the agent, the different agents I have running on the different servers. So does that answer your question there? It's just create the database. I created a log database, put it in a DB space where it can grow. So there'll be plenty of room there. And that's all you need to do. Any other questions? Good question. Running the on checks on an operational environment will affect performance. And particularly, this is why you want to plan the on checks very carefully. And you can do them, I think, a week or 2 before because they will lock tables. When you run the on check to check tables, it will lock that table. And you don't want to do that in the middle of a day when people are using your database. You want to plan to run these at night, on a weekend, when they're not being used. That's a very good question. And so plan it very carefully. Any other questions? Well, if there are no more questions, I will go ahead and end the webcast. I'd like to thank you all for coming. And the webcast, yes, good question. The webcast will be on our site in a couple of days. If you go to advanceddatatools.com, we have on the main page, see our past webcast. And you'll see all the webcasts from the last few years here. And we've got a lot of them. They're also on our YouTube channel, but the on our website includes slides, and in some cases there'll be example code that you can download. Like when Art did his webcast last year, he included example code and utilities that you can download. So yes, give us a few days. With Mike's webcast on Thursday, it'll probably be Friday before we get both of these up, but we should have both of these on our website in a couple of days. Cool. Well, I don't see any more questions. Thank you all again for coming, and I appreciate this, and hope you all have a good day. Bye now.